Have you forgotten I'm your mom?
We don't need you. We've got your money now.
My children thought they'd won by taking my money and my home, but they'd actually revealed their true characters to everyone who mattered. The community I'd spent decades building relationships with could see exactly what kind of people they'd become, and it wasn't pretty. Meanwhile, I was starting to rebuild, not just financially, but emotionally and socially. Malik Jr. and Kiara insisted I stay with them as long as I needed, but I didn't want to impose forever. I started looking for a modest apartment, something simple where I could figure out my next chapter. That's when David Corey called me. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year, but he'd heard through business channels about my legal troubles. When he reached out, I was surprised by how emotional the conversation became. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, "I owe everything I have to your belief in me 15 years ago. Not just the money, though that was crucial, but the fact that you saw potential in me when no one else would. You changed my life." I told him about my situation, about how my children had betrayed me and stolen my home. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. "Mrs. Johnson," he said finally, "I want you to know that your investment in my company is now worth approximately $15 million. But more than that, I want you to know that if you need anything at all, you just have to ask." $15 million. I'd forgotten about that investment entirely, but it was still there, growing quietly while my children fought over the wealth I'd given them directly. It wasn't enough to match what they'd stolen from me, but it was enough to give me options, enough to ensure I wouldn't be dependent on anyone else's charity. But I still didn't touch it. Something was telling me to wait, to let my children dig their holes deeper before I revealed what cards I still held. And that instinct proved to be right, because the news Malik Jr. brought me after my 4th week of exile changed everything. "Miss Beverly," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table with a grim expression, "you need to hear this. Leon's investment scheme in Central America? It was completely fraudulent. The whole project was fake. He's lost everything he put into it. $15 million gone." I felt sick to my stomach, despite everything my eldest son had done to me. How's he taking it? Not well. My lawyer friend says Patricia is furious. She's talking about divorce, claiming she never agreed to such risky investments. She's already moved back to her mother's house with the kids. So Leon had lost not just his money, but his wife and children too. The greed that had driven him to betray his own mother had also cost him his nuclear family. "And Imani?" I asked, though I was almost afraid to hear the answer. Malik Jr. shook his head. Derek was having an affair, has been for months apparently. The woman he was seeing found out about Imani's money and convinced Derek to leave her for someone who could understand his artistic vision better. My heart broke for my daughter, even after everything she'd done. Is she okay? She's devastated, and financially she's in trouble too. All that spending on parties and artwork and trying to buy her way into society, she's burned through most of her inheritance. Derek took half of what was left in the divorce. 2 of my children had lost everything within a month of throwing me out. But it was what Malik Jr. told me next that really showed me how completely their greed had corrupted them. "Miss Beverly," he said quietly, "they're blaming you for all of this." I stared at him. "They're blaming me?" "They're telling people that the stress of the legal battle with you caused him to make poor investment decisions. Imani is claiming that the family drama you caused drove Derek away. They're actually saying that their problems are your fault for not just accepting their independence gracefully." The audacity of it took my breath away. They'd stolen my home, frozen my assets, and thrown me out in a storm, but somehow their self-inflicted disasters were my fault? That's when I knew it was time to stop being the victim in this story. My children had chosen their path, had burned every bridge between us, and were now trying to blame me for the consequences of their own greed and poor judgment. They thought they'd destroyed me, but they'd only revealed who they really were underneath all the love and sacrifice I'd given them. And now it was time for them to learn what happened when you betrayed the woman who built an empire from nothing. I looked at Malik Jr., this young man who had shown me more loyalty and love than my own children, and I made a decision that would change everything. "Malik," I said, "it's time to remind my children who they're dealing with. They seem to have forgotten that I didn't get where I am by being weak or naive. They're about to learn that when you try to destroy Beverly Johnson, you better make sure you finish the job." He smiled, and I saw a glint in his eyes that reminded me why I'd always believed in him. "What do you need me to do?" "First, I need you to arrange a meeting with David Corey. It's time to discuss my investment portfolio. And then," I paused, thinking about all the pain and humiliation my children had put me through, all the people they'd hurt in their quest for wealth and status. "Then, we're going to teach them that money without character is worthless, and that the woman they threw away still has more power than they ever imagined." The storm that had started with them throwing me out in the rain was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Over the next few weeks, as I watched my children's lives crumble from a distance, I began to see patterns that broke my heart, even as they vindicated every concern I'd had about their transformation. Leon's situation got worse before it got better, which is to say, it never got better. After Patricia left him and took the children, he became desperate to prove he could recover from his losses. Instead of cutting his spending and trying to rebuild slowly, he doubled down on risky investments. Malik Jr. told me that Leon had borrowed against his remaining assets to invest in another sure thing, this time a startup company that claimed to have revolutionary technology, but turned out to be another elaborate scam. Within 2 months of losing $15 million to the fake resort project, Leon had lost another $8 million to fraudulent tech investments. But what really destroyed him was his pride. Rather than admit he'd made mistakes, rather than reach out for help or advice, Leon kept insisting that he was just having a run of bad luck. He fired the legitimate financial advisors Patricia had insisted on and started following tips from random people he met at expensive bars and country clubs. The community that once respected him as a successful lawyer began to see him for what he'd become, a desperate man making increasingly erratic decisions. Clients started taking their business elsewhere when word spread about his financial troubles and poor judgment. His law practice, which had been thriving before he inherited the money, began to collapse under the weight of his obsession with becoming a wealthy investor. Imani's downfall was even more painful to watch because it involved her losing not just money, but her entire identity. After Derek left her for his wealthy mistress, Imani discovered that many of the friends she had been trying to impress had been laughing at her behind their back the entire time. The elaborate parties she had thrown, the expensive charitable donations she'd made to buy her way into society, none of it had earned her genuine acceptance. She'd been viewed as new money trying too hard, and the old money families she'd wanted to join had seen her desperation from miles away. When her financial situation became public knowledge through the divorce proceedings, Imani learned how quickly fair-weather friends disappear. The women who had smiled at her parties and accepted her donations suddenly became unavailable for lunch dates. But it was Kareem who truly broke what was left of my heart. My baby, my youngest son, who had been so full of compassion and community spirit, had become completely lost in Crystal's toxic world. The gambling had gotten worse. Crystal had convinced him that he could win back their losses at high-stakes poker games, that his natural intelligence would make him successful at cards. Instead, he'd lost hundreds of thousands of dollars chasing wins that never came. Crystal had also pushed him into investing in her career with increasingly expensive schemes. She'd convinced him to pay for a music video that cost $200,000 to produce, claiming it would make her a star. The video was professionally made, but generated almost no views because Crystal had no actual talent or fan base. When that failed, she moved on to convincing Kareem to invest in a fashion line she wanted to launch. Another $300,000 disappeared into a business plan that existed only in Crystal's imagination and Kareem's desperate desire to make her happy. But the worst part was watching how completely she'd isolated him from everyone who had ever cared about him. When his old friends from the community center tried to reach out, Crystal would intercept their calls and tell them Kareem was too busy for charity work now. When former colleagues invited him to reunions or community events, she'd schedule conflicting social obligations that she claimed were more important for their image. Malik Jr. had tried to maintain a friendship with Kareem, but Crystal had poisoned that relationship too. She convinced Kareem that Malik Jr. was jealous of their success and was probably feeding information back to me. The last time Malik Jr. had seen Kareem, my son had been cold and dismissive, treating his oldest friend like a stranger. "It's like watching someone disappear," Malik Jr. told me sadly. "The Kareem we knew is just gone, replaced by this person who only cares about impressing someone who doesn't even love him." And that was the cruelest irony of all. While Kareem was destroying himself trying to keep Crystal happy, she was already planning her exit strategy. Through his restaurant connections, Malik Jr. had learned that Crystal had been seen around town with other wealthy men, always when Kareem was out of town on business or at his gambling sessions. She was hedging her bets, looking for her next source of income, because she could see that Kareem's money wouldn't last forever at the rate they were spending it. The woman my son was bankrupting himself for was already shopping for his replacement. All of this information was heartbreaking, but it also confirmed what I'd begun to understand about the situation. My children hadn't just taken my money and my home, they'd given up their souls in the process. The greed that had driven them to betray me had also made them vulnerable to people who saw them as nothing more than walking ATM machines. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my life in ways that my children couldn't have imagined. The community of people who had remained loyal to me was stronger and more supportive than anything money could buy. Mrs. Terrence had not only started her own successful bookkeeping business, but she'd begun referring other clients to me for business consulting. My years of experience building a company from nothing were valuable to small business owners who needed practical advice more than they needed fancy degrees or impressive offices. David Corey had offered me a position on his company's board of directors, recognizing that my business experience and investment perspective could help guide the company's continued growth. The $15 million my investment was now worth felt less important than the respect and partnership he was offering. Malik Jr.'s restaurant chain was expanding, and he'd asked me to help him develop training programs for his management team. Working with him reminded me why I loved building my original business. It wasn't just about the money. It was about creating opportunities for people, about building something that made the community stronger. And that's when I realized what my real revenge would be. Not just revealing the money I still had, not just watching my children destroy themselves with their own greed. My revenge would be showing them what they could have had if they'd chosen love over money, character over wealth, family over status. I was building something new, something better, something that honored the values I'd tried to teach them. And I was doing it with people who understood that success means nothing if you achieve it by betraying the people who love you. 6 weeks after they threw me out in the rain, I made the call that would begin the final phase of this whole tragedy. "David," I said when he answered, "it's time to discuss that board position, and I think it's also time to explore some new investment opportunities. I have some ideas about giving back to the community that I'd like to run by you." "I'm listening," he said. "I want to start a foundation, something focused on helping young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, providing scholarships and mentorship programs, something that builds character along with opportunity." There was a pause, and then David's voice came back full of excitement. "Mrs. Johnson, that sounds exactly like the kind of legacy project our company would be honored to support. How much are you thinking of investing in this foundation?" I smiled, thinking about my children who were probably wondering how I was surviving without access to my frozen accounts. "Let's start with $10 million, and let's make sure it gets plenty of publicity. I want the whole community to know that there are still people who believe in using wealth to lift others up, not tear families apart. $10 million that my children didn't know I had, going to help young people achieve their dreams without losing their souls in the process. It was perfect." "And David," I added, "make sure the announcement mentions that this foundation is being started by someone who understands what it means to build something from nothing and who believes that success is only meaningful when it's shared with others." My children thought they'd destroyed me, but they'd actually freed me to become who I was always meant to be. And soon, very soon, they would learn that the woman they'd thrown away was stronger, wiser, and wealthier than they'd ever imagined. The storm was about to turn, and this time, I would be the one deciding who got left out in the rain. 2 months after my children threw me out in the rain, the local newspaper ran a full-page article about my new foundation. The headline read, "Local Business Pioneer Establishes $10 million Education Foundation for Underprivileged Youth." Below it was a photo of me at the press conference, standing next to David Corey and Malik Jr., all of us smiling as we announced the Beverly Johnson Community Development Foundation. The article detailed my rags to riches story, my years of community service, and my commitment to helping young people achieve their dreams without losing their values. I didn't have to wait long to hear how my children reacted to the news. Malik Jr. came to my new apartment, a modest but comfortable place I'd rented while I figured out my next permanent move, with a grim expression and news that was both satisfying and heartbreaking. "Miss Beverly, you need to hear what happened when that article came out." I poured us both coffee and settled in to listen. Over the past weeks, I'd been preparing myself for this moment. The moment when my children would realize that their poor, helpless mother wasn't as defenseless as they'd assumed. "Leon called me," Malik Jr. continued. "First time he's spoken to me since before everything happened. He was furious, kept asking where you got $10 million, whether you'd been hiding money from them, whether the foundation was some kind of scam to avoid their legal claims." I wasn't surprised. Leon's lawyer mind would immediately go to legal angles and potential threats to what he considered his money. "What did you tell him?" I told him the truth, that you're a smart businesswoman who had investments they didn't know about, and that maybe if they treated you with respect instead of throwing you out in a storm, they might have been included in your future plans. I could imagine Leon's reaction to that. How did he take it? Not well. He started ranting about how you were trying to make them look bad, how you were playing the victim to gain sympathy. Then he said something that really showed me how far gone he is. Malik Jr. paused, like he wasn't sure he should repeat what came next. "Tell me," I said quietly. He said, "That money should be ours. She's our mother. Everything she has belongs to us eventually. She's just throwing it away to spite us." The words hit me like a physical blow. Even after everything they'd done to me, even after stealing my home and leaving me homeless, Leon still believed he was entitled to every penny I had. The foundation money wasn't mine to give away in his mind. It was his inheritance being squandered. "And Imani?" I asked, though I was almost afraid to hear. "She came to the restaurant yesterday. She looked broken, Miss Beverly. Really broken. She'd been crying, and she kept asking me if you thought you'd ever forgive them." My heart clenched despite everything my daughter had done to me. "What did you tell her?" "I asked her if she thought you should forgive them. If she really looked at what they'd done to you, stealing your home, having you declared mentally incompetent, throwing you out in a storm, and thought that was the kind of behavior that deserved forgiveness without consequences." And she started crying harder, said she never meant for things to go so far, that it was all Leon and Patricia's idea, that she just went along because she was scared of being left out. Malik Jr. shook his head sadly, but then she said something that showed me how far gone she still is. I waited for him to continue. "She asked if you thought you might include her in the foundation work, might give her a chance to redeem herself by helping with charity work. Like this was all just some test you were putting them through, and if she found the right way to apologize, everything would go back to normal." The selfishness of it was breathtaking. Even in her supposed remorse, Imani was looking for a way to benefit from my foundation, to use my charitable work to rehabilitate her own image and possibly gain access to my resources again. "She still doesn't understand that actions have consequences," I said quietly. "She thinks love means never having to face the results of your choices." "Exactly. And Kareem?" Malik Jr.'s expression got even grimmer. "Kareem is in real trouble, Miss Beverly. Crystal drained everything she could from him and then left, took up with some tech executive she met at one of their casino nights." My heart broke for my youngest son, even as a part of me felt vindicated in my concerns about Crystal. How is he handling it? Badly. He's been trying to win her back by throwing money at her new situation, paying for fancy gifts to send to her new place, covering her shopping sprees, even paying for romantic dinners she has with her new boyfriend. The pathetic desperation of it made me want to cry. My son was financing his ex-girlfriend's relationship with another man because he couldn't accept that she'd never loved him for anything but his money. He's completely broke, Miss Beverly. The gambling, Crystal's demands, the bad investments she talked him into. He's lost everything. And now he's borrowing money from dangerous people to try to keep up the lifestyle she expects. Dangerous people. My baby was getting involved with loan sharks and criminal elements because he couldn't let go of a woman who saw him as nothing more than a bank account. He came by last week, asked if I could loan him $50,000, said it was for a business opportunity, but I could tell it was either for gambling or for Crystal. When I said no, he got angry, started saying things about how you were probably working with me to punish him. The paranoia was heartbreaking. Kareem had isolated himself so completely that he now saw conspiracies everywhere, unable to accept that his problems were entirely self-inflicted. Malik, I need you to understand something. As much as this hurts, as much as I want to help them, I can't save them from themselves. If I bail Kareem out now, he'll just lose whatever I give him and come back for more. If I welcome Imani back without her facing real consequences, she'll never learn that love requires respect and loyalty. He nodded slowly. I know, Miss Beverly, but it's hard to watch, even after everything they did to you. It's hard because we still love them. But love doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior. Sometimes love means letting people face the full consequences of their choices. That's when Malik Jr. told me something that changed my perspective on the entire situation. Miss Beverly, there's something else. Something I didn't know whether to tell you, but I think you need to know. Crystal didn't just leave Kareem for someone richer. She's been blackmailing him. I felt my blood turn cold. What do you mean? She has photos, videos, recordings, evidence of some of the illegal gambling operations Kareem got involved in when he was desperate to win back his losses. She's threatening to turn him into the police unless he keeps paying her to stay quiet. My room spun around me. My son wasn't just heartbroken. He was being extorted by the woman he thought he loved him, and he was potentially facing criminal charges for gambling activities. How do you know this?
Because Crystal approached me, Malik Jr. said grimly. She wanted to know if I thought you'd be willing to pay to keep Kareem out of prison. She suggested that maybe a family intervention could be arranged for the right price. The evil cunning of it took my breath away. Crystal was trying to use Kareem's legal troubles to extort money from me, betting that I'd pay anything to protect my son from prison. What did you tell her? I told her that anyone who truly knew you would understand that you don't negotiate with people who hurt your family. And I warned her that if she thought she could threaten Kareem to get to you, she was making a very dangerous mistake. I looked at this young man who had shown more loyalty and wisdom than my own children, and I felt a surge of gratitude mixed with determination. Malik, I need you to arrange something for me. I want to meet with each of my children individually, not to reconcile, not to give them money, but to give them one final chance to understand what they've lost and what they've become. Are you sure that's a good idea? They're all pretty desperate right now, and desperate people don't always think clearly. I'm sure. It's time they understood that their mother isn't the broken, helpless woman they threw out in the rain. It's time they learned who they're really dealing with. Over the next week, Malik Jr. set up 3 separate meetings. Each of my children thought they were meeting with me alone to discuss their situation. None of them knew about the others' meetings, and none of them knew what I was really planning. The first meeting was with Imani. She came to Malik Jr.'s restaurant during a quiet afternoon, looking nothing like the sophisticated socialite she tried to become. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled, her makeup was smeared from crying, and she had the desperate look of someone who'd lost everything that mattered to her. "Mama," she said as soon as she saw me, "I'm so sorry. I know we hurt you. I know we made terrible mistakes, but I never wanted it to go this far." I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus desperate manipulation. What exactly are you sorry for, Imani? For letting Leon and Patricia push us into the legal action, for not standing up for you, for treating you like you didn't matter. And what about how you treated Mrs. Terrence? How you dismissed the community that raised you? How you spent months telling people I was embarrassing and old-fashioned? Imani's face crumpled. I was trying so hard to fit in, Mama. I thought if I had enough money, if I acted the right way, those people would accept me, but they never did. They just saw me as someone to laugh at. And now that you've learned they don't accept you, you want to come back to the people you threw away? I want to come home, Imani whispered. I want to be your daughter again. I want to help with your foundation, work with you to help people the way we used to. I felt my heart breaking and hardening at the same time. Imani, do you understand what you're asking me? You're asking me to pretend that you stole my home, didn't have me declared mentally incompetent, didn't throw me out in a storm. You're asking me to forget that when I needed my daughter most, she chose money over love. I was confused, Mama. The money changed everything, made everything complicated, but I know better now. Do you? Or do you just know that your original plan didn't work out and now you need a new strategy? Imani started crying harder. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you, please don't give up on me. I'll do anything to make this right. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and tried to see if there was any trace left of the child I'd raised, the young woman who used to play piano for elderly neighbors and volunteer at community events. Imani, I said quietly, if I told you right now that I would never give you another penny, that you'd have to rebuild your life entirely on your own, would you still want a relationship with me? The question hung in the air between us, and I watched her face carefully as she processed it. For a moment, I thought I saw a flash of genuine emotion, real love separate from financial concerns. But then her expression shifted slightly, and I saw the calculation creep back in. Of course, Mama. I love you for who you are, not for your money. The lie was subtle, but unmistakable. Imani was telling me what she thought I wanted to hear, not what was really in her heart. Even in her supposed repentance, she was still trying to manipulate me. Then prove it, I said, standing up from the table. Rebuild your life without my help. Show me that you can remember the values I tried to teach you without needing my money to motivate you. Show me that Imani Johnson still exists somewhere inside the person you've become. But Mama, no buts, Imani. You made your choices. You burned bridges that can't be rebuilt with tears or apologies. If you want any chance of ever having a real relationship with me again, you'll have to earn it by becoming someone worthy of respect again. I left her sitting at that table, crying into her hands, and I felt both heartbroken and relieved. My daughter was still lost, still looking for shortcuts and easy answers. She wasn't ready for real redemption yet. But she would be. Soon enough, when she had no other options left, Imani would have to decide who she really wanted to be. And that decision would determine whether any part of the daughter I'd raised still existed inside her. The meetings with Leon and Kareem would be even harder, but they were necessary. Before this was over, all three of my children would understand exactly what they threw away and exactly what it would take to earn even the possibility of forgiveness. The storm was reaching its peak, and soon, very soon, they would all be standing in the rain themselves, begging for shelter from the consequences of their own choices. 2 days after my disappointing meeting with Imani, Leon showed up at Malik Jr.'s restaurant. Unlike Imani, who looked broken and desperate, Leon still carried himself with arrogance. His expensive suit was perfectly pressed, his shoes were polished, and he walked in like he was doing me a favor by agreeing to meet with me. But I could see the cracks in his facade. The slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted around the room, the forced confidence that couldn't quite hide his desperation. Leon was in trouble, and he knew it. "Mama," he said, settling into the booth across from me with that lawyer smile he'd perfected over the years. "I have to say I'm impressed by this foundation initiative. Very clever way to control the narrative after our family disagreement." Family disagreement. That's what he was calling the theft of my home and the destruction of our relationship. "Is that what you think this is, Leon? A publicity stunt? I think you're a smart woman who knows how to play the game, and I respect that. But I also think it's time we put this whole misunderstanding behind us and work together like the family we are." I studied my eldest son's face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse or love. All I saw was calculation and barely disguised desperation. Work together how exactly? Leon leaned forward, slipping into his persuasive lawyer mode. "Look, Mama, I know things got heated between us. Patricia was pushing me to be more aggressive than I wanted to be, and maybe we went too far with the legal action, but that's all water under the bridge now." "Water under the bridge," I repeated slowly. "You had me declared mentally incompetent, stole my home, and threw me out in a storm, but that's just water under the bridge." "We were protecting our interests," Leon said, his mask slipping slightly. "You threatened to take back our inheritances. What were we supposed to do?" "You were supposed to remember that I was your mother, not your enemy." Leon waved his hand dismissively. Family dynamics are complicated, but the important thing is moving forward. I've been thinking about your foundation, and I have some ideas about how we could structure it more effectively. The audacity took my breath away. He wanted to control my foundation, to insert himself into my charitable work so he could benefit from it somehow. And why would I want your input on my foundation? Because I'm a lawyer with experience in nonprofit law, because I'm your son, because we could do great things together if we pool our resources and expertise. There it was, the real reason for his visit. Leon was broke, his law practice was failing, and he thought he could use my foundation as a way to rehabilitate his reputation and access my money. "Leon," I said quietly, "how much money do you have left?" His confident expression flickered. That's not really relevant to how much. The silence stretched between us until finally he spoke. I've had some temporary setbacks, bad advice from Patricia's friends, some investments that didn't pan out the way they should have. But these are just short-term issues. With the right partnership, you're broke, aren't you? Leon's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely. I made some mistakes, okay, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm still your son, still part of this family. You can't just cut me off forever because of a few bad decisions. A few bad decisions? I felt anger rising in my chest. Leon, you stole my home. You had lawyers trying to have me committed. You threw me out in the rain because I dared to question your behavior. Those weren't bad decisions. That was a calculated attack on your own mother. We were protecting ourselves. The desperation was showing now, the panic of a man who'd lost everything and was running out of options. You gave us that money, and then you threatened to take it back. What were we supposed to do? Just let you destroy our futures because your feelings were hurt? My feelings were hurt? I stood up from the table, my voice rising with all the pain and anger I'd been holding back. Leon, you treated me like I was some kind of obstacle to your wealth, instead of the woman who built that wealth from nothing and gave it to you out of love. Love doesn't pay bills, Mama. Love doesn't secure futures. You taught us to be practical, to think strategically. I taught you to work hard and treat people with respect. I taught you to remember where you came from and help others along the way. When did I ever teach you that money was more important than family? Leon was standing up now, too, his lawyer training taking over as he tried to regain control of the situation. You're being emotional instead of logical. The past is the past. What matters now is finding a way forward that benefits everyone. Benefits everyone, or benefits you. I'm trying to rebuild my practice, trying to get my family back. Patricia says she might consider reconciliation if I can prove I've learned from my mistakes. Working with your foundation could show her that I'm committed to making better choices. There it was, the truth. Finally, Leon didn't want reconciliation with me because he loved me or because he was genuinely sorry. He wanted to use me to win back his wife and rebuild his image. So I'm supposed to rescue you from the consequences of your choices so you can convince Patricia to come back? You're supposed to help your son when he's in trouble. That's what mothers do. The entitlement in his voice, the assumption that I owed him salvation after what he had done to me was staggering. Leon, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Mothers help their children learn and grow. They don't enable them to avoid consequences. And they certainly don't help children who throw them out in storms. So that's it. You're just going to let me lose everything because of your pride. I'm going to let you face the results of your own choices, just like you let me face the results of trusting you with my love and my money. Leon's face twisted with rage and desperation. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your son. Doesn't that count for something? Being my son counted for something when I worked 3 jobs to put you through school. It counted for something when I gave you $21 million. It counted for something when I loved you unconditionally for 35 years. But you threw all that away when you decided money was more important than family. So you're just going to let your own son be destroyed?
I'm going to let my son learn that actions have consequences, something I should have taught you a long time ago.
Leon's expression hardened into something cold and calculating. You know, Mama, I've been doing some research into your foundation funding. That money had to come from somewhere, and my lawyers are very interested in tracking down any assets you might have hidden during our legal proceedings. There it was, the threat I'd been expecting. Even in his desperation, even while begging for my help, Leon was still trying to find ways to take what wasn't his. Let me save you some legal fees, Leon. The money for my foundation came from an investment I made 15 years ago, long before I ever gave you children your inheritances. It was never part of your trust funds, never part of your legal claims, and never something you had any right to. His face went pale. 15 years ago? What investment? The kind of investment you would have known about if you'd ever bothered to really understand my business dealings instead of just counting the money you thought you'd inherit. Leon sat back down heavily, the full scope of his miscalculation finally hitting him. He'd assumed I was helpless without the assets he'd stolen, but I'd been planning and building long before he was even born. How much? He whispered. Enough to fund my foundation, buy a new home, and live comfortably for the rest of my life without ever needing anything from the children who betrayed me. The devastation on his face was almost pitiful. He'd thrown away his mother's love for money that was never really secure, and now he was learning that the woman he dismissed as weak and outdated had resources he'd never even imagined. Mama, please. No, Leon. You made your choice when you threw me out in the rain. Now live with the consequences. I left him sitting there, staring at the table, finally understanding that he'd lost everything that truly mattered and gained nothing in return. The next meeting with Kareem would be even harder, but it was necessary. My children needed to understand that the woman they'd underestimated still had power they'd never dreamed of. And soon, very soon, they'd learn exactly what that power could do. The meeting with Kareem was scheduled for the following evening, but I almost canceled it 3 times. Of all my children, seeing him would be the hardest, because he'd always been my baby, the one who'd stayed closest to my heart, even as he grew into a man. But Malik Jr. convinced me that Kareem needed to hear what I had to say, needed to understand the full scope of what he'd lost, just like his siblings. When Kareem walked into the restaurant that night, I barely recognized him. The confident, compassionate young man I'd raised was gone, replaced by someone who looked broken from the inside out. His clothes were expensive but wrinkled, like he'd been sleeping in them. His eyes were bloodshot and darting around nervously, and when he sat down across from me, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his coffee cup. "Mama," he said, and his voice cracked like he was 12 years old again. "I messed up. I messed up so bad, and I don't know how to fix it." Unlike Leon's arrogance or Imani's calculated tears, Kareem's pain felt genuine. But I'd learned not to trust my maternal instincts completely anymore. Too much had happened, too many lies had been told for me to accept anything at face value. "Tell me what happened, Kareem." He took a shaky breath and began talking, the words pouring out like he'd been holding them back for months. He told me about Crystal's manipulation, about how she'd convinced him that love meant proving himself worthy through extravagant spending. He told me about the gambling, about how she'd made him believe he could win back their losses. He told me about the illegal poker games, the loan sharks, the increasingly desperate attempts to fund a lifestyle that was bleeding him dry. She never loved me, Mama. She was just using me, and I was too stupid to see it.
Even when she left, even when she took up with that tech guy, I kept thinking if I could just give her enough money, if I could just show her how much I cared. And now, I asked quietly, now she's blackmailing me. She has evidence of the illegal gambling, photos of me with the wrong kind of people. She says if I don't keep paying her, she'll turn everything over to the police. My heart broke for my youngest son, even as part of me wanted to shake him for being so naive. How much do you owe her, Kareem? He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he whispered, $200,000. Maybe more. I lost track. $400,000 in debt to criminals and a woman who was extorting him. My baby was in more trouble than I'd even imagined. Kareem, I said carefully, why are you telling me this? What do you want from me? He looked up at me with tears in his eyes, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to run to me when he had nightmares. I want my mama back, he whispered. I want to undo everything that happened, take back every terrible thing I said and did. I want to be your son again. The raw emotion in his voice was almost my undoing, but I learned hard lessons about the difference between genuine remorse and desperate manipulation. Kareem, do you remember what you said to me the night you threw me out of my house? He closed his eyes in pain. Mama, I was angry. I was confused. You said I had a poverty mindset. You said I'd never understand real wealth. You told me I was holding you back from your future. I kept my voice steady despite the pain those memories caused. Do you remember that? I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything. Were you wrong, or are you just desperate now that your choices have caught up with you? Kareem flinched like I slapped him. Both, maybe. I don't know anymore. I can't tell the difference between what I really feel and what I think I should feel to make you help me. The honest admission surprised me. At least he was being truthful about his confusion and desperation. Kareem, if I paid off all your debts right now, if I made all your problems disappear, what would you do next? I'd try to be the man you raised me to be. I'd go back to working with kids, helping the community. I'd remember what really matters. And if I told you I wouldn't give you a penny, that you'd have to face the consequences of your choices completely on your own?
Kareem was quiet for a long time, thinking. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I'd probably panic. I'd probably try to find another way to get the money, maybe do something even worse than what I've already done. I'd probably end up in prison or worse. Again, the brutal honesty caught me off guard. Kareem wasn't trying to manipulate me with promises he couldn't keep. He was acknowledging that he was so far gone he might not be salvageable. Kareem, do you know what Crystal did after she left you? He shook his head, but I could see he was afraid to hear the answer. She approached Malik Jr. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to pay to keep you out of prison. She was planning to use your legal troubles to extort money from me. The color drained from Kareem's face completely. She what? She was going to use your pain, your desperation, your criminal liability as leverage against me. Even after everything our family had been through, she saw an opportunity to make more money. Kareem put his head in his hands and started sobbing. Not the calculated tears Imani had shed, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from the core of his being. I gave her everything, Mama. I gave her my money, my dignity, my family, my soul. And she was planning to use all of that to hurt you even more? Yes, she was. But Kareem, she couldn't have done any of that if you hadn't given her the ammunition. She couldn't have blackmailed you if you hadn't gotten involved in illegal activities.
She couldn't have threatened me if you had chosen her over your family. I know it's all my fault, every bit of it. We sat in silence for several minutes while Kareem cried and I wrestled with my own emotions. This was my baby, the child I'd loved most fiercely, and seeing him destroyed like this was agony. But I'd also learned that love without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was enabling. Kareem, I said, finally, I want you to understand something. I could pay off your debts right now. I have the money, and part of me wants to save you because you're my son and I love you. Hope flickered in his eyes. But if I do that, what will you have learned? What guarantee do I have that you won't make the same mistakes again? How do I know you won't find another crystal, another get-rich-quick scheme, another way to throw away everything I give you? The hope died, replaced by resignation. I don't know. I don't even know how many bad decisions I've made. I don't trust my own judgment anymore. Then maybe the first step is learning to live with the consequences of your choices. Maybe the first step is facing the full weight of what you've done and finding out who you really are when everything is stripped away. Mama, if I don't pay these people back, they're going to hurt me, maybe kill me. The words hit me like a physical blow. My son was telling me that refusing to help him might be a death sentence. Kareem, what you're asking me to do is enable the same destructive behavior that got you into this situation. You're asking me to rescue you from consequences so you can avoid learning from your mistakes. I'm asking you to save my life. Are you? Or are you asking me to postpone your reckoning until the next time you make catastrophic choices? Kareem stared at me with tears streaming down his face, and I knew how much I loved him. I reached across the table and took his hands in mine. They were cold and shaking, and I could feel how thin he'd gotten. Kareem, I love you. I will always love you, but I can't save you from yourself anymore. I can't keep giving you safety nets that prevent you from learning how to make better choices. So you're going to let me die? The question hung in the air between us, and I felt my heart breaking into a million pieces. But I also felt something else. A strange kind of peace that comes from finally understanding what real love requires. I'm going to let you face the full truth of your situation. And then, if you can find a way to save yourself, if you can prove that you've learned something from this nightmare, maybe we can talk about what comes next. How am I supposed to save myself? I don't have any money. I don't have any friends left. I don't have anything. You have your intelligence. You have your work ethic when you choose to use it. You have knowledge of the community and skills that could help people if you remembered how to put others before yourself. That's not enough to pay off $400,000. Maybe not, but it might be enough to find a different path forward. It might be enough to discover who Kareem Johnson really is underneath all the mistakes and greed and desperation. I stood up to leave, and Kareem grabbed my arm. Mama, please, I'm begging you. Kareem, do you remember what I used to tell you when you were little about helping people? Through his tears, he nodded. You said God blesses us so we can be a blessing to others. You said we should always help people when we can because we never know when we might need help ourselves. That's right. And do you remember what else I taught you? That strangers might end up helping us instead of the family we think we can count on. Exactly. So maybe instead of trying to extract help from the mother you betrayed, you should focus on becoming the kind of person who deserves help from the community you abandoned. I pulled my arm free and headed toward the door. Behind me, I could hear Kareem calling my name, but I didn't turn around. If I looked back, if I saw his broken face one more time, I might weaken. And weakness now would destroy any chance he had of truly saving himself. Outside the restaurant, Malik Jr. was waiting for me. He'd been watching from the bar, making sure I was safe during this emotional confrontation. "How did it go?" he asked gently. "Harder than I expected, but necessary."
All three of them have now heard the truth about their situation. They know you're not the helpless victim they thought they'd destroyed. What's next? I looked up at the sky. It was a clear night, no storms in sight, but I could feel electricity in the air like something big was building. "Now we wait," I said. "We wait to see what they do with the truth. We wait to see if any of them can find their way back to being the people I raised them to be. And if they can't." I thought about that question as we walked to his car. 3 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be considering cutting my children out of my life permanently, I would have thought they were insane. But now, after everything I'd been through, after seeing who my children really were underneath the love I'd poured into them, I understood something I'd never wanted to accept. Then I'll build a new family with people who understand what loyalty and love really mean. I'll use my resources to help people who deserve help, and I'll let my biological children live with the consequences of choosing money over family. As we drove away from the restaurant, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but the deep peace that comes from finally accepting reality and choosing to move forward with dignity and strength. My children had exactly 1 week to prove they were capable of change. After that, I had plans that would show them and the entire community what happened when you betrayed Beverly Johnson. The storm was about to break, and this time, I would be the one controlling the weather. But before that week was up, something happened that I never could have predicted, something that made me understand just how far my children had fallen and how much they still didn't understand about the consequences of their actions. 3 days after my meeting with Kareem, Malik Jr. called me in a panic. "Miss Beverly, you need to get down to the hospital right away. It's Kareem." My blood turned to ice. What happened? He tried to handle his debt problem himself, went to meet with the loan sharks to negotiate. It didn't go well. I was in Malik Jr.'s car within 5 minutes, my heart pounding with fear and guilt. Had I pushed my son too hard? Had my refusal to help him driven him to do something desperate that got him hurt? When we arrived at the hospital, I found Leon and Imani already in the waiting room. They looked up when I walked in, and I saw a mixture of emotions cross their faces: surprise, guilt, relief, and something that might have been shame. "Mama?" Imani said quickly, standing up. "We didn't know if someone had called you." "How is he?" "Conscious," Leon answered. "Beaten up pretty badly, but the doctors say he'll recover. He's got a broken arm, some cracked ribs, and a concussion." I felt weak with relief. "Can I see him?" "He's been asking for you," Imani said quietly. "The doctors said family can go in one at a time." I made my way to Karim's room, steeling myself for what I might find. When I pushed open the door, my heart broke all over again. My baby was lying in that hospital bed, bruised and bandaged, looking more vulnerable than he had since he was a child. "Mama?" he whispered when he saw me. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything.
I sat down in the chair next to his bed and took his uninjured hand in mine. Kareem, what happened? I tried to negotiate with them, tried to work out a payment plan, but they said they'd heard I had a rich mama who'd been in the newspapers with her foundation. They wanted to know why I wasn't just getting the money from you. My stomach dropped. What did you tell them? I told them the truth, that I'd hurt you so badly you wouldn't help me, that I'd thrown away the best thing in my life for money and a woman who never loved me. Tears were streaming down his bruised face. And you know what they said? I waited for him to continue. They said any man stupid enough to throw away his mother's love for a woman like Crystal deserved whatever happened to him. Even criminals understood what I'd given up. The irony was heartbreaking. My son had to be beaten by loan sharks to understand what people with criminal records already knew, that a mother's love was priceless. Kareem, what do you want to do now? I want to go to the police. I want to tell them everything about the illegal gambling, about Crystal's blackmail, about the loan sharks. I want to face the consequences of what I've done instead of running from them. I squeezed his hand gently. That's going to be very difficult. You could go to prison. I know, but Mama, lying in this hospital bed, thinking about how close I came to losing my life over money that was never really mine anyway, I realized something. I'd rather be in prison as an honest man than free as someone who keeps making the same mistakes. For the first time since this nightmare began, I heard something in my youngest son's voice that gave me hope. Not desperation or manipulation or calculation, but genuine resolution to face his problems honestly. Kareem, if you do this, if you tell the truth and accept whatever consequences come, I want you to know that I'll be proud of you, not because the outcome will be easy, but because you'll finally be acting like the man I raised you to be. Will you visit me if I go to prison? If you go to prison as a man who told the truth and tried to make things right, yes, I'll visit you. I'll support you through whatever comes next. He closed his eyes and smiled for the first time since I'd seen him. That's all I wanted to know. When I left Kareem's room, Leon and Imani were waiting in the hallway. They both looked shocked by seeing their younger brother so injured, so broken. Mama? Leon said hesitantly, "Can we talk, all of us?" I looked at my two older children, really looked at them, and saw something I hadn't seen in months. Fear, yes, but also something that might have been genuine remorse. What do you want to talk about? Imani spoke up. About what we did to you, about how wrong we were, about whether there's any way to fix what we broke. Let's go to the cafeteria, I said. If we're going to have this conversation, we might as well be comfortable. 20 minutes later, we were sitting around a small table in the nearly empty hospital cafeteria. My two oldest children looked nervous, like they were finally beginning to understand the gravity of what they'd done. Mama, Imani began, seeing Kareem in that hospital bed, knowing that we all played a part in destroying our family, I can't live with this anymore. What exactly can't you live with, Imani? The guilt. The knowledge that we threw away the most important thing in our lives for money. The understanding that we hurt the one person who loved us unconditionally. Leon nodded in agreement. Mama, I've lost everything. My money, my practice, my wife, my children. Patricia won't even let me see the kids because she says I'm a bad influence. And the worst part is, she's right. I became someone I don't recognize. And what do you want from me now? I asked. We want to know if there's any way back, Imani said. Any way to earn your forgiveness and become your children again. I looked at these two people who had caused me so much pain, who had stolen my home and thrown me out in a storm, and I felt the weight of everything that had happened between us. Let me ask you both something, I said. If I told you right now that I would never share another penny with either of you, that you'd have to rebuild your lives entirely on your own, would you still want a relationship with me? They exchanged glances, and I could see them thinking carefully about their answer. Yes, Leon said finally. Mama, I know I've given you every reason not to believe me, but yes, I want my mother back more than I want any amount of money. Me too, Imani added. I've learned what it's like to live without family, without people who love you for who you are, instead of what you can give them. I never want to feel that empty again. Then prove it. Both of you. Stop asking me for money. Stop looking for shortcuts. Stop trying to manipulate your way back into my good graces. Show me through your actions that you remember the values I tried to teach you. How? Leon asked. Figure it out. You're intelligent adults. Use your education, your skills, your connections to help other people. Rebuild your lives by being useful to your community instead of just taking from it. Imani was crying again, but these tears felt different from the calculated ones she'd shed before. Mama, what if we can't? What if we've fallen too far to climb back up? Then you'll have learned the most important lesson of all, that character matters more than money, and that once you lose people's trust and respect, it's almost impossible to get it back. I stood up to leave, but Imani grabbed my hand. Mama, will you give us a chance? Will you watch to see if we can change? I looked down at my daughter, this woman I carried in my body and loved with my whole heart, and I made a decision that surprised even me. I'll give you 6 months, I said. 6 months to show me that the children I raised still exist somewhere inside the people you became. 6 months to prove that you understand the difference between wanting forgiveness and earning it. And then, Leon asked, then we'll see. But understand this, I'm not the same woman you threw out in the rain 3 months ago. I've learned that love without respect is worthless, and that enabling people doesn't help them grow. If you want to be my children again, you'll have to earn that privilege. As I walked out of that hospital, leaving my 3 children to contemplate their futures, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete control over my own destiny. For the first time since Malik died, I wasn't defining myself through my children's successes or failures. I was choosing my own path forward. But I also knew that this story wasn't over yet. There was still one more card to play, one final lesson to teach about the difference between earning wealth and stealing it, between building character and destroying it. My children had 6 months to prove they could change, but the community was about to learn something about Beverly Johnson that would reshape how they thought about justice, loyalty, and the true meaning of success. The final storm was coming, and it would wash away everything that wasn't built on solid ground. 6 months. That's how long I gave my children to prove they could change, to show me that somewhere beneath all the greed and entitlement, the people I raised still existed somewhere inside the people they became. But I didn't spend those 6 months sitting around waiting to see what they do. I spent them building something that would teach the entire community and my children a lesson about the true meaning of legacy. The first thing I did was expand my foundation beyond what anyone expected. That $15 million investment with David Corey had grown even more, and I used every penny of it to create something unprecedented in our city. The Beverly Johnson Community Development Foundation didn't just give out scholarships. We built an entire ecosystem of support for people who reminded me of the woman I used to be. We opened a business incubator for single mothers trying to start their own companies. We created a mentorship program pairing successful professionals with young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. We established a loan program for people who couldn't get traditional bank financing but had solid business plans and strong character references.
But the crown jewel of the foundation was something I announced at a press conference exactly 3 months after that night in the hospital. Standing in front of the city's most prominent business leaders, community activists, and media representatives, I revealed my plans for the Beverly Johnson Community Center, a $50 million facility that would provide job training, childcare, educational programs, and social services in the neighborhood where I'd raised my children. $50 million, the same amount I'd lost when my children threw me out in the rain. But this time, it was going to people who understood the value of opportunity and wouldn't squander it on status symbols and get-rich-quick schemes. The announcement sent shockwaves through the community. People couldn't understand how the broken old woman my children had portrayed me as could suddenly be funding projects that dwarfed most corporate charitable giving. The whispers started immediately. Where had this money come from? How long had I been planning this? What did it mean for my children's legal claims against me? Malik Jr. was with me at the press conference, now serving as the foundation's executive director. When reporters asked about my children, I gave them an answer that had been months in the making. My biological children made choices about what kind of people they wanted to be, I said calmly. They chose money over family, greed over gratitude, entitlement over empathy. But I've learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about shared values, mutual respect, and genuine love. The young people this foundation will serve are more like family to me than anyone who shares my DNA, but not my principles. The message was clear. I wasn't just building a community center. I was building a new legacy with people who deserved it. But the real shock came when I announced the funding source. In front of all those cameras and reporters, I revealed the full story of my investment with David Corey 15 years earlier. I explained how I'd believed in a young immigrant entrepreneur when nobody else would. How that $200,000 investment had grown into a stake worth over $20 million, and how that money had been sitting there all along while my children plotted to steal assets they thought I needed to survive. You see, I told the crowd, real wealth isn't just about accumulating money. It's about recognizing potential in others and investing in their dreams. It's about building relationships based on trust and mutual respect.
It's about creating value that lasts beyond your own lifetime. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in that room. While my children had been scrambling to steal the wealth I'd already given them, I'd been quietly sitting on assets they'd never even known existed. Their betrayal had been not just morally bankrupt, but also strategically stupid. David Corey spoke at the press conference too, telling the story of how my early investment had saved his company and how my ongoing mentorship had helped him build a business that now employed over 500 people. He announced that his company would be matching my $50 million commitment to the community center, bringing the total investment to $100 million. Mrs. Sean didn't just give me money 15 years ago. She gave me belief in myself when I had nothing else. She taught me that success means nothing if you don't use it to lift others up. This community center will honor those values and help hundreds of other young people achieve their dreams. As I watched the reporters scribbling notes and the cameras flashing, I thought about my children. By now, they would have heard about the press conference. They would be realizing that the mother they dismissed as weak and outdated had just committed $100 million to helping strangers, money that could have been part of their inheritance if they'd chosen love over greed. But the real message wasn't about the money. It was about showing them what they could have been part of if they remembered the values I'd tried to teach them. Instead of being honored as part of a legacy of giving and community building, they were now publicly known as the children who'd betrayed the woman creating it. The community's response was swift and definitive. The same social circles that my children had been so desperate to join immediately embraced me as a pillar of philanthropy and social responsibility. The same business leaders who had dismissed my children's nouveau riche behavior now sought my advice and partnership. Mrs. Terrence, whom Leon had fired so callously, was hired as the foundation's chief financial officer. The community center would be built in the neighborhood where she'd raised her own children, providing opportunities for families just like hers. Mrs. Johnson, my 91-year-old neighbor whom my children had deemed embarrassing, was honored as the inspiration for the center's senior services program. At the dedication ceremony, she sat in the front row while I spoke about the importance of respecting our elders and learning from their wisdom. Every person my children had dismissed as beneath them became part of something bigger and more meaningful than anything they'd ever attempted to build. But the children themselves, they spent those 6 months exactly as I'd hoped they would, learning what it meant to rebuild from nothing, to face consequences, to depend on their own character instead of inherited wealth. Kareem went to prison, as he'd decided he would, but he didn't go as a victim or a martyr. He went as a man, taking responsibility for his choices. He testified against the illegal gambling operation, helped police understand Crystal's blackmail schemes, and provided information that led to the prosecution of several other criminal enterprises. From prison, he wrote me letters, real letters, not desperate pleas for money or legal help, but thoughtful reflections on what he'd learned about himself and his values. He enrolled in every educational and counseling program available to inmates. He started a mentorship program for younger prisoners, teaching them about financial responsibility and the dangers of get-rich-quick schemes. For the first time since he inherited that money, Kareem was using his intelligence and compassion to help other people instead of just himself. Leon lost his law practice completely, but instead of wallowing in self-pity, he started over from the bottom. He took a job as a public defender, earning a fraction of what he'd made before, but doing work that actually mattered. He moved into a small apartment, took public transportation, and lived on a budget that forced him to make careful choices about every purchase. Patricia still wouldn't take him back, but Leon stopped trying to win her over with grand gestures and expensive gifts. Instead, he focused on proving to his children that he could be a man of character even when he didn't have money to throw around. He showed up for every soccer game and school play, always on time, always present, always focused on being a father instead of trying to impress people with his wealth. Imani's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. After Derek's betrayal and the loss of her social standing, she moved back to our old neighborhood and got a job teaching music at the community center where she'd volunteered as a child. The salary was tiny compared to what she'd been spending on parties and designer clothes, but she threw herself into the work with a passion I hadn't seen since she was young. She started an after-school program for kids who couldn't afford private music lessons, teaching them the same piano pieces she once performed at fancy society events. But now, instead of playing for audiences who saw her as an outsider trying to buy acceptance, she was sharing music with children who looked at her like she was giving them magic. All 3 of my children learned to live within their means, to work for their money, to treat people with respect, regardless of their economic status. They learned what it felt like to be valued for their contributions rather than their bank accounts. And slowly, very slowly, I began to see glimpses of the people I'd raised. The 6 months came and went, and my children never once asked me for money. They never tried to manipulate me or guilt me into bailing them out of their struggles. They simply worked hard, lived honestly, and tried to rebuild their lives one day at a time. It was on a rainy Tuesday evening, exactly 9 months after they'd thrown me out in that storm, that all 3 of them came to see me. Not to my old house, which I'd never tried to reclaim, but to the modest home I'd bought near the community center where I spent most of my time. They stood on my front porch in the rain, just as I had stood on theirs so many months ago. But this time, the person with the power to offer shelter was me. "Mama," Imani said when I opened the door, "we know we don't deserve it, but we'd like to talk to you, if you're willing." I looked at my 3 children, really looked at them. Kareem was thin from prison food, but strong in a way he'd never been before. Leon was wearing a cheap suit instead of designer clothes, but he carried himself with more genuine confidence than I had seen in years. Imani had no makeup, no expensive jewelry, but her eyes were clear and peaceful in a way they hadn't been since she was a teenager. "Come in," I said. "Let's get you out of the rain." We sat in my living room, the same furniture from my old house, the same family photos, but arranged in a new space that represented the life I built without them. They looked around nervously, probably wondering if I was going to lecture them or demand apologies or list all the ways they'd failed me. Instead, I simply said, "Tell me about your lives." And so they did. They told me about the work they were doing, the people they were helping, the lessons they'd learned about what really mattered. They talked about how hard it had been to live without financial safety nets, but also how liberating it was to know that whatever they achieved was truly theirs. Kareem talked about the young inmates he was mentoring, how helping them avoid his mistakes had given him a sense of purpose he'd never found in his old life. Leon talked about his clients, people who couldn't afford fancy lawyers but deserved good representation. He told me about cases he'd won for families facing eviction, for workers who'd been cheated by their employers, for people who reminded him of who we used to be before money corrupted everything.
Imani talked about her students, about the little girl who'd cried with joy when she played her first complete song, about the teenager who decided to audition for music school because Imani had shown him he had talent worth developing. They weren't just telling me about their work, they were telling me about becoming the people I'd always hoped they'd be. When they finished talking, the room was quiet, except for the sound of rain against the windows. Finally, Leon spoke. "Mama, we know we can't undo what we did to you. We know we hurt you in ways that might never heal completely. But we want you to know that we understand now what we threw away, and we're spending our lives trying to become worthy of the love you gave us. We're not asking for forgiveness," Imani added. "We're not asking for money or help or anything else. We just want you to know that the children you raised are still here. It took losing everything to find them again. But they're here." I looked at these three people who had caused me more pain than anyone else in my life, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again: genuine pride. Not pride in their success or their achievements, but pride in their character, their growth, their willingness to face hard truths about themselves. "Do you know what the most beautiful part of this is?" I said quietly. "You didn't come here because you needed something from me. You came because you had something to give. The gift of letting me see that my life's work wasn't wasted, that the values I tried to teach you weren't lost forever." Kareem was crying now, but they were tears of relief rather than desperation. "Mama, are we your children again?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain that had witnessed both our family's destruction and now, perhaps, its rebirth. "You were always my children," I said. "Even when you broke my heart, even when you threw me away, you were still my children. But now, for the first time in years, you're also good people. And that matters more than any amount of money ever could." I turned back to face them. "I want you to be part of the foundation's work, not as beneficiaries, not as people I'm supporting financially, but as partners in building something meaningful. I want you to help me create opportunities for young people who remind me of the people you've become. People who understand that real success comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down." The joy on their faces was worth more than all the money I'd ever made. But then I added something that made them understand just how completely our relationship had changed. "And I want you to know that when I pass away, the bulk of my estate won't be going to you. It's going to the foundation to ensure that this work continues long after I'm gone. You'll receive enough to be comfortable, but you'll never again have the kind of wealth that corrupted you before." Instead of anger or disappointment, I saw relief in their eyes. "Thank you, Mama," Imani said. "Thank you for loving us enough not to enable us to become those people again. Thank you for teaching us that the best inheritance isn't money, it's character. Thank you for showing us that being your children is a privilege we have to earn every day." As we hugged for the first time in almost a year, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. My children had received $64 million and thrown me out in the rain. 3 months later, they'd been begging for help, but not from me, from themselves, from their community, from the values I'd tried to instill in them. They'd learned that money without character is worthless, that family is about more than blood, and that the people who will help you when you're truly in need are often the ones you've helped when they needed you. But most importantly, they'd learned that their mother was stronger, wiser, and more resourceful than they'd ever imagined.
The woman they'd thrown away had built something more valuable than all their inheritance combined, a legacy of love, service, and genuine community that would outlast any amount of money. The rain was still falling outside, but this time we were all safe and warm inside together. And this time, I was the one who got to decide who deserved shelter from the storm. Money comes and goes, I realized, but the people you choose to love and who choose to earn your love in return, those are the relationships that make life truly rich. My children had learned that lesson the hard way, but they had learned it. And that, more than any inheritance I could have left them, was the greatest gift I could give them. The storm had passed, and we were all standing. Now, tell me what you'd do differently if you were treated this way by your kids. Would you cut them off permanently or later forgive, and how much would you spend on them again? Let me know in the comments section below. Before you go, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with your loved ones. We post videos every single day on this channel, so it's a good thing if you check out other videos here too. Don't forget to comment your thoughts and opinions on this story. We'll see you in the next story. Bye!